Hello, good afternoon, guys. Welcome to this live video. Today, we're going to be discussing a very exciting topic. So, we're going to be talking about how to, answer questions at your U.S. immigration interview. Welcome, guys. Let me know where you're watching me from. Drop me a comment. Let me see you. Let me know you're watching me. Let me know I'm not talking to myself. All right, guys. So we're going to be talking about how to answer questions at your U.S. immigration interview. Very crucial, very important. It's as I would say, it's a skill, it's an art, and it's a science. Okay, so there's a science to it. There's a methodology to it. You need to do it in a certain way to make sure that you get the most out of your interview. Okay, so first things first. So let's talk about when you are asked the question, keep it very simple, okay? Only answer what you are being asked. Don't start telling stories about your grandmother and your grandmother's village and her farm and all the rest of those things. Just keep it very simple. If you are asked, okay, where did you guys meet? You just, where did you guys meet? We met in school. Okay, and then you try to end it there. Of course, unless you can give more background. So let's say you met in school. Which type of school? So you can talk about the fact that, okay, we met in nursing school, or we met in medical school, something of the sort. Don't give more answers than you have been asked. It just leads you into a rabbit hole, leads you down a rabbit hole, and then you may not get pulled out. You see, you may end up saying something that you're not supposed to say. So as much as possible, remember that the key word is crisp and concise. Answer the question you have been asked. The interviewer is really not your friend. There's just really, it's just not there. You need to prove that you are eligible for what you are seeking. So remember that by the time you start the interview, you're at 0. So you need to build up to 100. Okay, so you are not at 100, and then what you say will be, will reduce your marks. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just trying to make an analogy. You need to build your story, but in building your story, you still need to be very focused on what you are being asked. Okay, that's one thing. So keep it crisp, keep it concise. Guys, drop me a comment. Let me see you're watching me. I hope you guys like my new glasses. I love it. Okay, so yeah, that's the problem with online. I didn't know this was going to come out as bold and as red as ever, but I got to rock it. So here I am. Okay, so keep it crisp and concise and sweet. And then number 2, so we're of course focusing on marriage-based interviews. Okay, marriage-based interviews. Secondly, don't try to lie or don't try to guess. I have people call me, well, they go for the interview thinking that, oh, slam dunk, we've got it covered. And then they go and things turn upside down and it becomes a whole nother ball game. And then they start fumbling and lying and trying to justify, and then they end up in a problem. So if you're asked the question and you don't know, don't lie. If you're asked the question, what is your husband's birthday? And you don't know, well, that's something you should know. If you don't remember, you can just simply say, I don't remember. Don't try to fabricate and then it becomes a problem. Or let's say, where does your husband work? Remember, this is one thing, they have all the answers. Whatever question they are asking you, they have a way to verify, because otherwise they are not going to be asking you. They're not there to learn. Well, they're there to actually verify, to see if what you're saying is true. So most likely than not, they already have the answers to the questions that they're asking you. So they're just looking for confirmation. And so if they ask you, where does your husband work? And you know your husband, and you don't know, and your husband actually works at Walmart, and then you decide to guess and say, oh, he works at Wawa, that's going to be a problem because it's a lie. So there's nothing absolutely wrong with saying, I don't know the answer to that. Or I'm quite nervous and I can't think straight. I mean, all of a sudden, I just, the answers have gone out of my head. It's allowed. It's better than actually lying, because they understand that sometimes people are not used to, you know, these kinds of interviews are very, well, they could be nerve-wracking, especially if you haven't prepared adequately. And so it's quite normal to be, you know, nervous. And so it's a better answer to say that I don't remember or I don't know, than it is to, you know, try to force an answer or to lie. Guys, I got me a new mug. I hope you guys like it. Trust me, I'm a lawyer. Yep, better do what it says. So we're still spilling the tea and sipping it. So yes, guys, it's perfectly okay to say, I don't know, I don't remember. Don't lie, don't try to fabricate, okay? I remember that you know, there was a client of mine who went for an interview, and then they were asked, okay, where does your husband work? Okay, well, clients, and she didn't remember. She didn't remember where her husband worked, but this was a genuine marriage. They'd been married for about 7 years or 6 years or something. And she was asked, where does your husband work? She was actually filing for citizenship based on marriage, okay? So with that, you're going to be asked things based on your marriage, the bona fides of your marriage. And she didn't remember. And the interviewer was like, well, that's quite strange that you don't even know where your husband works. But the comeback was really good. She didn't remember. And all she stated was that it's pretty normal that she doesn't remember where her husband works. In fact, that the second question that she was asked was, what was the name of her husband's previous spouse? That was the question. She was asked, what was the name of your husband's ex-spouse? And her husband had been divorced for like a long time, maybe like 2 decades ago, like 20 years ago. And she didn't remember. Of course, she knew who her husband's ex-wife was, but she didn't remember in the spur of the moment. And the interviewer was like, that's quite strange that you don't remember. And then she was like, I mean, it's pretty normal that I don't remember my husband's ex from 20 years ago. Even me, I don't even remember the names of all my exes, like even from 6 years or 5 years ago or 7 years ago. And so that was such a good comeback. You see, those are some of the things that attorneys help you to prepare towards, you know, to be able to respond adequately to these people, because sometimes they are unreasonable. Like, how do you expect somebody to remember the name of her spouse's ex from 20 years ago? Some people will remember. Some people have, you know, have better things to do with their memories and all of that. And this couple actually had kids. They had, you know, little kids, and they had things going on. And she was like, look, who my husband was married to 20 years ago is not priority, you know, so it's not, I don't need to remember the name of the person. Eventually she was giving the citizenship, but she was able to, of course, articulate this very clearly, you know, during the interview. So I don't remember, I don't know, are perfectly good answers. But of course, you need to also be mindful. You don't have to say, I don't remember to everything. Of course, there's a fine line, because there's some amount of basic knowledge that you should have. Okay. So if you guys are married and you are asked, okay, when did you guys get married? And you say, I don't know. That's, you know, so yeah, you as much as possible, that's what the preparation is for. You need to prep and, you know, do the pre-interview and rehearsals, and your attorney, I will drill you. We go through everything. And so you will most likely feel like it's a simulated interview. And so on the day off, you'll be more confident, you'll be less nervous, and you'll be ready to take on the officer. Okay. And then the last, let's talk about this last thing. Don't make excuses for your relationship. So we're talking about a marriage-based interview, okay? Don't try to explain and over-explain. So there are some people that are married to men that are, let's say, 30 years older than they are. There are some people that are married to women that are 20 years younger than they are, or whatever, you know, whatever the permutations are. Sometimes the marriage doesn't look conventional, okay? So sometimes a marriage looks like, what's going on? it's normal. I mean, you see people and then people judge, like, okay, why is this old man, walking with this young hot model? Like, what is the model in for? Is she in for his money? And is the guy in for her beauty or whatever? So there are all these judgments, okay? But try not to make excuses during the interview to the officer. So, for example, like the some of the questions that come up are how you guys met, how long you dated before getting married, and who attended your wedding and who did not attend the wedding, things like that. Okay, let me pause. I see some questions coming in, so let me just Mame Korowa Ba says, good job, sweetheart. Thank you so much, Mame. So excited to have you on here. Yeah, Kranting. Hello, yeah, it's been a while. Are you, as a lawyer, allowed in the interview room? Yes, we are allowed to go in, to advocate for people. But the thing is that the truth of the matter is that the attorney has to know her place during the interview. When it comes to interviews, the attorney is usually allowed to interject or to come in on points of law, okay? On points of law, not on points of fact. Well, even on points of fact, there's also some distinction. The attorney can come in on points of fact when she's trying to, clarify a point. Or, so for example, the interviewer has asked something, like there was an interview that happened and the attorney was there in the room. The immigrant was asked, where is your wife? Something about where is your wife? And then the immigrant was like, you mean my wife back home? And the attorney was there at that moment. So the immigrant was there with his American wife, and then he got confused and he was like, my wife back home. And then the attorney said, no, she's not talking, the officer is not talking about your ex-wife, she's talking about your current wife. So the immigrant apparently had an ex-wife back home in Ghana. Without the interjection of the attorney, there would have been a huge miscommunication and a huge problem. This would have been a fraud trigger, because when you say, you mean my wife back home, it's as if, okay, so this is a fraud marriage and you have a wife back home. But the attorney was able to step in, and then, because the attorney was on the case, he was able to quickly say that, look, the officer is not talking about your wife back home. So those are some of the things. But of course, depending on who you have as your officer, they may not allow you to clarify points of fact also. But essentially, the attorney is there for, it really depends on the field office, and it depends on who you meet. Some of the officers are really tough to deal with. Some of them are fine, but your advocate or your attorney has to be very solid on the law, has to understand your case in and out, and has to be ready and witty to come back with a response to the officer, because some of the officers actually try to bully, the people who are being interviewed. Okay, so yes, attorneys are allowed in the room. And one other caveat is that if the immigrant needs an interpreter for the interview, the attorney is not allowed to be the interpreter. So for me, for example, when I go with my Ghanaian clients, and they want me as an attorney, I cannot interpret for them in Twi or in the Ghanaian language. We usually have to find an interpreter, either by phone or somebody who will come in. And then in these COVID times, the interpreters are not allowed in the room, but the attorney would be allowed in the room with his client, okay, sitting. Sometimes they'll say sit by the client, sometimes behind or whatever, just depending on the situation. Okay, so let's somebody, Ohemaya is asking, how long is the interview process? It really depends on your issues and the kinks that they have to work through. Some couples have very, very strong marriages. Like sometimes when I even review some applications, I get excited. I'm like, oh my goodness, the bona fides are solid. Like you can tell this is a marriage of love. Like everything is checked off. Like there are no issues. But there are some interviews where you can tell that this is going to be a problem, because clearly those people don't have enough bona fides. So it depends, of course, on whoever is interviewing. But It could last for 40 minutes. It could last for an hour. It could last for less, or if they have what they need. Normally, the interviewer would review your file before you guys come in, and then they'll start asking the questions. And, you know, depending on the things that come up, it might drag on, or it might just be like, you know, be quite short. So it just really depends. Mami Akua says, hi, hello, Mami, how are you? Mikey says, I have an asylum case pending. I got married to an American citizen. I applied for green card through that marriage. What's your take on that? Will the interview ask me about the asylum case? Mikey, it depends. Will the interviewer ask me about the asylum case? It depends. It depends. So I don't want to deviate from what we're talking about, but very briefly, if you file a frivolous asylum claim, it bars you from any type of subsequent immigration benefit. So it depends. They have discretion to ask you, you know, about it because you filed it. It just really depends whether it was even a defensive asylum or an affirmative asylum, defensive in court, affirmative with a U.S.CIS, and a whole lot of things. So let's not deviate. Let's stick to the matters. We're talking about U.S.CIS interviews, okay? So I hope that helped a little bit. So as I was saying, don't make excuses for your marriage. So I have an exciting case. We're going to talk about this case very briefly, and then we'll call it a day. All right, guys. So the case is Matter of Peterson. I love my mark so much. All right. So Matter of Peterson. This case was a very interesting case. I'm going to just sum it up for you, and then we'll talk about it. So the petitioner was about a 60-year-old man, and then his wife, so he was an American, a 60-year-old man, and then his wife was from Iran, a 53-year-old woman. And these people got married, okay? When they got married, the court, you know, well, they got married, and then the husband filed, of course, for his wife. And in the course of the application, issues came up that, look, the marriage was not bona fide for the purposes of immigration. And so the whole case turns on the fact that, okay, was a marriage bona fide? What are some of the things we can look at to see if a marriage is bona fide or not? And the court ruled that a couple doesn't have to live together or even have sexual intercourse or sexual relations in order for a marriage to be bona fide for U.S. immigration law purposes. And here is the lesson. There are so many other case laws that have established that, look, sometimes some marriages are not conventional, and it's fine, okay? So in this particular case, the man, who is a 60-year-old man, actually couldn't even have sex. He was very, very sick, guys. Like he couldn't get his groove on, okay? And that's fine. There's some sexless marriages. Who are you to tell them that their marriage is not real just because they're not having sex? You don't know what kind of you know, issues they have or what the agreement is or whatever. So the fact that a couple is not having sex doesn't mean that the marriage is not real. You know, of course, there's also the distinction between the people who come in specifically just to get a green card. But the ruling of this case was that a marriage doesn't have to be conventional. Some people may not have, you know, a sexual relationship type of marriage. And in this case, the woman actually decided to go into the marriage because she needed a place to live. And in exchange, the man also needed a housekeeper, kind of to, you know, help him, maybe companionship and take care of him. So the court decided that that was a perfectly reasonable sort of exchange. And so people can actually enter into a marriage with some sort of understanding that, look, you want this, I want that. Let's be in a marriage. It's genuine. We intend to establish life together. The fact that people are not, you know, kissing in a marriage doesn't mean that the marriage is not real, okay? So basically, sometimes I have seen decisions of, you know, U.S.CIS where they are claiming that, okay, the marriage doesn't to a certain path, like, okay, maybe they don't behave in a certain way, and so based on that, the marriage is not real. Those are things that you can fight because, you know, interesting enough, this was the last ruling of the case. The judge said that The reasons for the marriage appear to be far sounder than exists for most marriages. There's not a single iota of evidence that this was a sham marriage. And where it is found that there does exist a bona fide marriage, that the marriage relationship is intended to be valid and lasting, and the parties have continued to reside together for a number of years, the motive or purpose in entering into the marriage is not really a primary concern. Okay. So this marriage was simply recognized for U.S. immigration law purposes because they understood that, look, it's an exchange. Sometimes remember that even in modern times, people get married to people for various reasons. Somebody gets married to another person because the person is a doctor, or the person has broad shoulders, or has or the girl has a very delicious figure, or she has money, or they're not going to say that, okay, because you entered into the marriage with a motive, then the marriage is not real. So guys, those are all some of the things that we can discuss before your interview to make sure that nobody is bullying you and depriving you of what you need to have. Okay. Well, all right, guys, let's read a few questions and then we can call it a day. Mikey, please feel free to call me, and then let me take a specific look at your case, because you certainly want to make sure that you're going to nail the interview. It's your chance to make sure you get that green card. Okay, so don't take it for granted. People go for the interview thinking that, oh, it's easy, and then they go and then everything turns upside down. Yeah, Cranston says, another question: what has happened to the Biden administration immigration bill? Oh my goodness, these politicians. I should be doing an update soon, but no updates. I mean, there's really nothing, but I'll be doing an update soon on that. It's unfortunate they just keep dancing around in circles with no real change or whatever. So I'm still keeping my ears very, very, very close to the ground to see what they come up with. Francis Gavin says, I see. And Francis Gavin says, very educative. I'm really glad that you guys found it educative. Thank you so much for watching. All right, friends, I'll see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys take care, and we'll see you again soon. Have a good night. Bye-bye.